I now give the floor to Mr. Nicholas Haysom.
Mr. President, thank you for the opportunity to brief on developments in South Sudan. When I last updated this council in April, I conveyed the Secretary General's assessment that the parties were yet to achieve a critical mass of the implementation of key steps necessary for a peaceful conduct of free, fair and credible elections. The Secretary General had recommended that the parties to the peace agreement engage with one another to find a consensual approach to the holding of these elections. Since then, discussions have indeed continued amongst the parties towards resolving these and other priority outstanding issues in the roadmap. We understand the high-level standing committee has completed its report, which is anticipated to be discussed by the President, well, yesterday as well as today, and we understand that a preliminary report has been released by the Minister of Cabinet Affairs as of last night. On the critical issue of the date of elections, we understand, however, that no date has been agreed as yet, and that the President has designated the electoral institutions to produce a feasible proposal on when these elections may be held. Meanwhile, in May, a second dialogue process was launched in Nairobi, known as the Tumaini Initiative. These talks, relocated from Rome and now hosted by the government of Kenya, seek to ensure that non-signatory parties, civil society, faith-based groups and traditional leaders join the peace process. The Tumaini Initiative has proposed new monitoring, oversight and implementation mechanisms and a National Leadership Council structure. In response to these proposals, the SPLM-IO announced its withdrawal from the Tumaini process on the 16th of July. Citing concerns that the Tumaini Initiative dealt with matters that were already agreed in the revitalized peace agreement, and accordingly it had gone beyond its remit. There is currently a lack of clarity as to whether the SPLM-IO has reversed that decision, but as part of the report of last evening, there's an indication that this is under review. My team and I have employed all good officers at our disposal to engage the parties involved in these ongoing processes, including the Tumaini mediation team. I welcome the spirit of consensus building in which both dialogue processes have been conducted. UNMISS has encouraged an approach whereby both processes would be mutually reinforcing in the search for consensus between all stakeholders, that is, amongst formal signatories and non-signatories to the peace agreement. As things stand, however, it seems that further clarity is required on how the Tumaini Initiative and its outcomes will converge with and thus complement the framework of the revitalized peace agreement. To be clear, the mission is not championing either process as an exclusive modality, but as promoting the constructive confluence of the two. It is imperative that both processes advance with deliberate speed to deliver on the aspirations of South Sudanese citizens. Mr. President, with regard to the overall implementation of the revitalized agreement and its roadmap, I refer to your forthcoming briefing by the chair of the reconstituted Joint Monitoring and Evaluation Commission, RJMAC, Ambassador Major General Charles Gatai. UNMISS notes that some steps have been taken by the parties and institutions since my last report, which includes the provision of funding to the National Constitutional Review Commission, albeit short of a fully operational budget. State High Election Commission committees have been appointed, and with UNMISS assistance, the NEC has begun assessing the ground level infrastructure and facilities required for a conducive environment for conducting elections. To date, 29 political parties have been registered, although some parties continue to object to, firstly, the registration fee amount set by the Political Parties Council, secondly, the announcement of the closure of the registration period, and thirdly, the practice of some parties, contrary to the Act, in maintaining their military formations. On the 5th of July, the National Elections Commission announced 22nd of December 2024 as the date for elections, citing its legal obligations under the National Elections Act. I note, however, that there is still ongoing consultations between the political stakeholders as to whether elections can or should be held this year. This makes it difficult to treat 22 December as a definitive trigger in isolation from other critical factors. If a final decision is made in favour of elections in December, UNMISS would proceed with this Council's mandated request for the Secretary-General to provide a report on the security situation, which will include protection of civilians and force protection evaluations 90, 60 and 30 days before any election. In the meantime, UNMISS continues to support the creation of an enabling environment for elections in South Sudan, whenever they are to be held. We are following on maximising the mission's protection presence through three key lines of effort, that is dialogue and engagement, physical protection, and the creation of a broader protective environment. And this includes through capacity building support to the host government towards a greater self-reliance in the protection of its own people. On that note, I must report the concerns of South Sudanese stakeholders, including civil society, political parties, the Commission on Human Rights in South Sudan, and members of the international community with regard to the National Security Act 2014, Amendment Bill 2024, currently passed by Parliament. The powers of arrest without warrant granted to the National Security Service are claimed to be incompatible with the spirit of South Sudan's transitional constitution, the revitalized agreement, as well as South Sudan's rights treaty obligations under regional and international human rights law. National stakeholders hold that the law is in contradiction with their aspirations for open civic and political space upon which to build a democratic society. It has been noted that the President has the power to refer the law back to Parliament to remedy the criticisms that have been raised, and that this would be a significant opportunity to demonstrate a commitment to achieving the open political space in which to conduct South Sudan's first democratic elections. Meanwhile, subnational violence continues to undermine the nominal stability realized thus far. Our current concerns relate to deadly clashes in the Greater Upper Nile region, which required a reinforced UNMISS presence in Pariang in the Ruweng administrative area, as well as alleged mass abductions in central Equatoria and periodic intercommunal violence and criminality involving communities in Warrap, in Lakes, in Unity, and in Yongle. Mr. President, a perfect storm is gathering in South Sudan as regards its humanitarian and economic outlook. This is reflected by a protracted humanitarian crisis founded on chronic food insecurity, a spillover of the Sudan conflict into South Sudan, resulting in the movement so far of 750,000 refugees and internally displaced people, uncertainties in the face of critical political events necessary for a peaceful transition, a rapidly deteriorating economy exacerbated by the rupture in critical oil infrastructure and oil revenue, and the potential for once-in-a-lifetime flooding in September. Any one of these elements on its own presents a significant challenge. When taken together, it could push the country to a tipping point, and all during a time when the people of South Sudan are embarking on a delicate phase of nation building. UNMISS is working closely with the UN country team, humanitarian partners, and the government of South Sudan on scenario planning, analysis, and mitigation for the difficult period ahead. Be that as it may, time is running out, and the costs of inaction at this juncture are too great. Should the elements of the perfect storm converge, it would stretch beyond the respective capacities of the United Nations and risk derailing the country's political transition. The implications for the broader East African region would be significant. Fiscal and monetary discipline will be required to meet this challenge, including transparency on the management of oil review and exchange rates. The failure to pay salaries to uniformed and civilian members of the civil service is an additional source of tension. I therefore encourage the government to prioritise the payment of public sector salaries and the delivery of social protection and basic services to the most vulnerable. I urge council members and partners, including the international financial institutions, to do their utmost to engage in efforts to mitigate the impact of the current humanitarian pressures on South Sudanese citizens. For UNMISS, our overriding priority remains to prevent a return to conflict and to support the people and the government of Sudan in laying the foundation for a peaceful, prosperous and democratic society for generations to come. As I've said, a collective push by all stakeholders and especially the traditional government is now. We appreciate the efforts of all of our partners, including the African Union, our JMAC, the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, the Troika, the European Union, the members of this Council, as well as the Peace Building Commission for their unwavering support. I thank you.